Thank you. That's the right point, I guess. Anyhow, I guess everybody wants to know what happened, so. It was in the evening, somewhere around 10:30, we was going up through roughly where we are now, here in Shag Harbour, and we noticed some lights, and they would have been from here up that way across the road. Going along, I don't know, can't remember what we noticed at first, but they was going in sequence. One would be on, and two, and three, then four. They'd all be on for a second, they'd all go off, and that sequence seemed to start over again. And as we was driving along, it seemed to be going along with us. I can't tell how high it was or how far, but it was high enough in the sky to be invisible. And as we drove along, like I said, it seemed to go along with us. And then as we got up towards where the school is now, it seemed to take a 45-degree angle from going along level to tipping down. And then we had to turn and go more or less north. We was going west along the highway by the school. And we come to where there was a hill and there was a low place. And as we was coming up the hill, as the light was going down, and just before we made the top of the hill, we lost sight of it. And then when we got to the top of the hill, we could see the light in the water. In the meantime, we thought it was a plane had crashed, so we went and called the RCMP from a phone booth in Woods Harbour, and he more or less didn't believe us, and the first thing he asked me is what we was drinking, and I said we had then. So anyhow, we did get the phone number from where the phone booth was, and I went to get in the car to leave, and the phone rang. And that's when he asked me where we could meet, where we see it at, or where we could meet. I told him what we call the Moss plant. That's where the little site is that they got set up after the UFO thing now. So we drove back down there, and we got there. We could still see the light in the water, and it was more or less drifting down with the tide. And we must have been there 5 to 7 minutes before the RCMP got there. There was 3 other people with me in the car. So as we watched it drift down, and when the RCMP got there, there was 2 cars. One come first, then the second one. There was 2 in one and 1 in the other, but I can't remember how far apart them cars were, people getting there. And they got out and watched it, and there was a few more people coming. As we watched it drift down, we had to walk to the top of the hill. And we must have watched it 20 minutes roughly altogether, then it just disappeared and the light went out. In the meantime, they'd called the Clarks Harbour for the Coast Guard to come, and some local fishermen here who'd seen it had gone and got in their boat or heard about it and went out and started to look to see if there was any wreckage or anything, and we never seen nothing. And anyhow, so the next day, so that night, the Clarks Harbour, the Coast Guard got it in. It was the 101 coming to Prospect Point. I got in aboard that and went out, me and some of the Mounties. We went out to look, see if we could find anything. We've seen no wreckage or no whatsoever. So that's roughly what happened that night. So if you got some questions, I'll answer them maybe.
Were you witness to the yellow phone that was on the water at that time?
Not myself. I probably see the phone when I was paying attention to it like they did.
Tell them about the bowling alley the next day. When the Mounties come up to you, told you what you didn't say.
I don't know if that was the next day or a couple of days later. Now. The Mounties told me it said it was identified as a UFO. I guess that's what you want to hear, Chris, was it?
Well, yes, you say it well, but I wanted to hear what the Mounties said, yeah.
All right, come to me in a minute. So many things.
No, but that's the point. They stopped you. You see, yourself or nobody said this was a UFO. It was the
Right.
authorities. Very different.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that.
Sorry, okay, questions for Laurie?
Yeah.
So you had people in the car with you before you arrived on the scene. You dropped somebody
Yes,
off
there was
before-
3 other people. No, they went back to the scene with me.
Oh,
They don't want to talk about it for some reason.
Okay.
Ruth Ann Gorham at the time it was. She did do an interview for the paper and the TV at the time, but the other 2 didn't want to talk about it at all. So I won't bother to give their names, I guess.
2-part question. Were there any lights breaking off when you see the object in the sky?
No, there's nothing out. It just seemed to be going along. 1 come on, 2, 3, 4, then I'll be on for a second and go off.
Different colored lights?
No, all look roughly that colour.
Yellowish, orange.
Yellowish, white. Not bright, just that colour.
And did it seem like a pattern, or?
Yes, it seemed like they was going on and off in the pattern, yes. And they was spaced apart that way.
And how far do you think the object was away where you
Got
was?
no idea.
You couldn't tell?
There's no way to judge nothing.
And
There's no way to tell how high it was or how far it was. Like I said, all we could see was the light. We was driving. It was a good clear night, and it was high enough in the sky that you could see it. Like say, driving up through here, you could see it over the top of the tree. There was, you know what I mean? There was no time we lost sight of it driving until we come as it started to go down, and we got in that low place there by the school. It's the only time we lost sight of it, and that's for about 2 seconds. I'd say just before it hit the water, till we made the top of the hill. There was a light in the water, plain as day.
so you saw the lights in the water?
Light one. Only
One light in
One light in the water.
large, bright light, or?
It was same as the one in globes. And that's what it looked like, a half globe.
And it was still there by the time you got in the boat and went out?
We went and called the Mounties and reported a plane crash. When we got back, the light had drifted down the harbour some from where we see it, but it was still on. And we must have watched it 5 minutes or more before the Mounties got there. And we must have watched it 20 minutes or more before it disappeared. And it didn't look like it just vanished. It didn't sink, go down through the water like that. It didn't die out float, just went black.
And did you witness the RCMP witness the object in the water?
Yeah, I was talking to them. There's 3 of us there together. I knew them all at the time anyhow.
While the object was in the water?
Yes. They watched it for 20 minutes or more. And that's why the RCMP officer called me back. Another RCMP officer also see it go down, and he called it in, but he didn't know where it was.
And he told
He was coming. Chris, do you know where he was coming from? Ron
Yeah,
Paul?
there was three Mounties responded in 2 different cars.
No, Ron Paul see it when I did. He see it go down.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one that called it in before I got back in the car. That's why the RCMP
Yes,
called me
right,
back.
he's seen it, and just one other thing I have, when you're saying you had no idea how big it was, the Mounties took a guess. When Ron Pond, you might remember, looked at it through field glasses, and he saw it go in front of the budget buoy, and it
Okay.
hid the budget buoy, so he guessed it stood 8 feet under the water, in the water. That's what Ron Pond told me, but anyway.
Okay.
I got a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
Did the light that you witnessed, did it cast light in the conventional sense, like a flashlight would cast light?
No, all like globes, all like just like a round ball. There was no beams, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, just like even the 4 that was on looked like just no spotlight or nothing, just a round light or a.
And the other question I have is, I can't remember if it was you or the other witnesses. Some of the witnesses said that there was a sound associated with the sighting. Did you hear anything?
We never heard nothing in the car.
Silent.
Can you recall what the RCMP said to you 2 days later? Like, they told you to forget about it? Or?
Well, we was in the bowling alley and the RCP officer said, you know what you see? And I said, no, I have no clue. What he said, it was a UFO.
The RCMP said that?
Yeah, that's what they told me.
So they didn't tell you to forget about it or anything like that?
No, they just said that's what you see. That's what they called me.
Did you see any identifying features or shape or anything else aside from just the light itself?
Nothing at all.
The only thing really visible was the
No,
light
maybe if
itself.
we'd have been outside the car and
Yeah.
looking at it as up, maybe you could have, like if you'd have been standing out there when you see
Yeah,
it.
I didn't even,
Driving and going through, like, no, there was nothing but the lights.
I have a question associated with that last question. I don't know, it may be a stretch to ask you to remember this, but when you were looking at the object, I know that the night was clear. Did you notice it blocking out any stars?
No.
Or it was just the lights you could see?
No.
You didn't notice that?
We didn't, was a look for it, you know, no, just wouldn't pay attention.
Yeah.
No,
Once it got in the water, you'd have some idea of the distance.
oh, that fools you too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a rough idea, but when you hear you think it's out there, but then I went out on the boat, and I don't think we were coming close enough to shore. Like in the daytime when we went out there, like the diving stuff, it's hard job to tell, but when I go back on the shore, I said, no, we wasn't in close enough, though. I got a rough idea how far it was, because we're on top of the hill, but we see it hit the water, I can tell by the angle it was in when we was going in it. wasn't way over there, you know what I mean? Just, I wouldn't be over 100 yards off, like, where it hit the water, if I went up there and looked after dark even now. You know, roughly where it, what the degrees it was. Yeah,
Yeah, what was the town response to your sighting? How did they treat you, and did you talk to other people who had
oh,
seen it?
yeah, well, they just, we figured we'd see an airplane, and I guess that's what everybody else figured it was, and when they brought the divers here, and they knew it was something, because the military don't come here and spend a week here for nothing.
Was there anybody coming to you afterward about this, like any RCMP or military?
And no,
No follow-up?
no follow-up from the RCP. When what I talked to them on my own, just, I knew a couple of them anyhow, so. No,
Is this the only time you've ever seen something like this?
no.
Oh,
Well,
you,
not, yeah, I see other things in the sky, but yeah, first, exactly like this, yeah.
I don't want to stray off topic of Shag Harbour because that's why we're here. But what else have you witnessed?
I see other lights in the sky nights.
Similar to the Shag Harbour incident?
Something, no, didn't come down, but yeah,
Yeah.
no, just one light.
Could you describe it? Its movements, possibly?
After I hit on out.
I've seen objects too in the sky.
Yeah.
Right around that same time, like early 70s.
Yeah, there was more than me see that, and there's more than, there's other people see other lights around here, because that roughly that same year, so.
Yeah.
Since you told us, I'll tell you what I saw when I was like 12, 13 years old. Following two satellites, young guys laying out down a creek, right? Clear sky, and two lights come together, and there was a bright flash, and only one kept on going. That was my
Yeah, if
experience.
you watch the sky, you can see amazing things, I guess, if you want to look at it long enough. Any other questions? Getting warm standing up there.
How big a crowd showed up by the time the Mounties were there, Dickie, at the high point? How many people were with you and the Mounties by the Moss Plain?
The four of us, the three Mounties. I know another couple cars coming. How many, I don't know. Maybe 2 or 3 other people, Fred.
Okay, yeah.
I can't even remember Normie and the fellas come up there before we went out on the, because Bryce and Mort Shanks up their boat
That's right.
went out.
Yeah.
Me and one of the Mounties, I think one of the Mounties anyhow, I know for sure I went out on the Coast Guard that night. They come into Prospect Point, picked me up.
So you went over with Ronnie Newell?
Yeah, on the Coast Guard, yeah.
Yeah.
It's called the Clark Harbor today, back then it was called the 101.
Yeah.
So this October 4th sighting, how long would you say, what was the duration of your sighting that particular evening?
Oh, we watched it probably 2 or 3 minutes in the car, roughly from around there along here somewhere. I can't remember where we first noticed the light, so. Up there, have you been up there?
No.
Okay, well, most of the people have been up there to the site, they,
I've seen the site, yeah, I haven't been around all the locations.
yeah, well, anyhow, what's that, 2 minutes drive from here to there?
How long on the water?
And then we had to go up and call the RCMP, that was probably 5 minutes before I got through to them, 3 minutes from the time, so that's 5. Then talk to him and come back, then probably 10 or 12 it was there. I was there 5 minutes for the Mounties. I'd say that's 17 and we watched it 20. They're probably in the water half hour to 40 minutes before the light disappeared.
After it hit the water.
After it hit the water. Oh, from the time we see it till it hit the water and it disappeared, I'd say half hour to 40 minutes.
And in the water, it was there long enough to drift, apparently drifted.
Yeah, well, it drifted from above where the Moss Plain is up there quite a ways till it got down past the range and on Moss Plain.
I'd take a fair time.
No, and it only going with the towing, so.
I know you said you didn't hear anything, but at the time of impact, did you hear anything at that point?
Nothing, never heard nothing, no explosion, no bang, we never see it the second it hit the water. We lost sight of it for probably about 2 seconds. But the minute you made it top of the hill, you could see the light there, plain as day. I mean, you've been up through there enough times, it's the clear night and the light on the water shows up like no street lights, nothing there back then, you gotta remember, pitch black. The old lighting house today, it looks like a city up through there, street lights and... Anyhow, any more questions or? Some of these guys want to talk about it after, but get up.
I was wondering what your sentiment is on what you did see when you did see it. Like, what were you all thinking? What was the chatter that was going on in the vehicle?
We wasn't saying much in the vehicle, we were just watching it, I guess, more than anything. I can't remember if we said anything, or maybe somebody said something, because everybody was looking at it and watching it. But what was said at the time, I can't remember. All I remember is when we see it going down, we got the top of the hill, see the light a while, I just said there's a plane just crashed, and we went to the phone booth and called the RCMP.
Do you remember the first few things he said to the officer?
Yeah, I just said, we just see a plane crash. He said, what you been drinking? As far as what we see, that's about it, I guess.
I have heard that said before, that's what it was said to you. Now, after the fact, when the police did arrive and realized something was going on, what was the dialogue that went between the two, the fellow you were on the phone with then?
Nothing.
Nothing?
No. Well, like I said, they got another RCMP officer had called it in. He'd seen the same thing, so they knew something had come down.
As did 6 other people.
So, I mean, yeah, there could have been more. I do know that now they called it in, so.
Did you ever contact anybody that's seen it in other areas besides Shelburne County?
Myself, no.
You never met with any of those
No.
witnesses?
No.
Bad.
Yeah, there's a few more around here see it than what we did, but like a lot of them never said nothing until a few years ago, so.
I have one last question for you. After all these years in retrospect, what's your feeling on what you would witness that particular night after all the babble about UFOs?
Same thing I said it was, American plane. Or I didn't say it was American plane, I said plane. Now I'll say it was American plane.
You still feel it's a plane that went down?
They don't fly up here. That people from the Pentagon was down there at the back at 8 o'clock the next morning. They don't fly up there because we thought we'd see something go down.
Right.
My uncle was at the base at the time. He asked the commanding officer what they see. He said, "You have no questions and we'll tell you no lies."
Which base?
Barrington Back Road, the Air Force Base. He was a sergeant there.
So you think that was some kind of
Something,
Project?
stealth,
Yeah.
something like that's my opinion. So.
okay.
He's saying it wasn't up in outer space, but I don't think it was. I do think there is things that coming up there, but I don't think that one was.
So if it had been an aircraft or something like that, there was enough fuss and searching and everything afterward to get any parts that...
I think they
any
come took
wreckage-
the whole thing.
Yeah, any wreckage that was there would have been removed.
Removed, yes.
Were you witness to any of the removal of debris?
Nobody was.
No.
Anyhow, I know that they come in, the first time they come in with the divers, they had the Coast Guard of them, that they hired a private boat. The divers were here for one day, like, just past the museum, that house there used to be a wharf down behind it, and that's the boat they had hired. The divers were here for a day. They come in early, they took something out of the boat, put it in the van and left. In the meantime, there'd been an American Navy ship or destroyer, wasn't a big one, probably 300 foot long. He'd come and lay between bomb borders and stay along. And he lay there for I don't know how many days after that. The first night it was thick fog like this. The next day the boat was gone. So I figured the divers found it. And when the first thick fog night was, they come in and picked it up. And believe me, back then the military, U.S. Navy had the equipment to come in that close and retrieve stuff back then too, so. Any other questions? Good, somebody else's turn, I gotta get in here. Anybody got any questions on that? Thank you.
We got it unwired here.
Let's go turn on, Chris.
All right. Okay, I'm going to start actually by asking you a couple questions because I wasn't sure I was going to cover any of this today, believe it or not. I know you've seen posters here. How many of your people here that are attending today, a handful of you that are here, are coming tomorrow? Show of hands. How many are coming tomorrow? Here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pick up a little bit and talk about Shag Harbour, because originally when I come down this week, I thought I was just speaking tomorrow when I thought I wasn't talking about Shag Harbour. I know that sounds funny, but other cases, because tomorrow Don Ledger will be covering that, you know, in detail right through. So because Laurie did such a good job of tweaking our interest, and remember, his is the story of a man who was there, which I certainly wasn't. I was 12 years old and in Dartmouth. But we're going to pick it up a bit from there and go through it, but we're going to talk about a few other things, or at least until you're tired of listening anyway, because they had some things drop out. Don isn't here to present until tomorrow, apparently, so I'm it. Anyway, Laurie's story is very interesting, and his is, of course, the man who was there, and this is, he was one of 7 people that reported that night. In fact, as he said, he was the first, but certainly not the only one. Other people did report the things that Laurie did not detect, such as a noise. And I can't tell you who heard what, but what they heard was reported in the Shelburne Weekly paper. And some people out by Maggie Guerin's Point heard a whistling noise as the object descended. And other people heard the sound of an explosion at the point of impact. I can't tell you which witness did it, but these were some of the calls that came in initially to the RCMP detachment in Barrington Passage. You know, they searched through the night there till 3 a.m. Remember, this all happened like 11:20 up to midnight. You know, it went on for some minutes on the water. The Coast Guard Cutter 101 with Ronnie Newell and his 2 men came. And it was so quiet that night, you know, when they started the diesel engines, that's 12 miles away in Clark's Harbour, they could hear the engine start up here. And visibility was perfect. You could see 6 magnitude stars. The moon was down. So, you know, conditions were good. They were sure of what they were looking at. Except the only thing is they didn't know what it was. And it's interesting that one of the unique features of Shag Harbour, one of the very interesting things that's so different from other crash scenarios, is nobody claimed they saw a UFO. People called, they were confused and they were concerned, you know, for the possibility of survivors. As Laurie said, he said he thought an airplane crashed. Others simply said that lights had gone into the water. The Mounties, of course, took the complaint seriously, as they do, and responded. And like he said, one of their own had seen it. The 3 officers that came on scene to the call, 2 came from the nearby Barrington Passage detachment, which was Constable Ron O'Brien, and the commanding officer, which was Corporal Victor Werbicki. The other one was Ron Pond, who was on highway patrol on Highway 3 and came from the other direction. They met up at the Moss plant. As I said when Laurie was answering questions, Pond took out his field glasses and watched it. His observations go a little beyond Laurie's. Pond felt, this is just his personal interpretation, that the object was moving faster than the ebbing tide. In other words, under its own power. What we do know is that when the 2 local boats went out on site to the impact site and the last known surface position. Now, I don't know, as Laurie said, whether it just disappeared or it submerged or whatever, but there was a large patch of thick, yellow, frothy foam. And at that point in time, that foam was half a mile long and 80 feet wide, or as Lauren said, 2 or 3 boat lengths to go through. And it was still bubbling to the surface, and it was odd, kind of like shaving cream, but had a sparkle. Some of the men said they smelled sulfur, others said it was odorless. But what's neat about it is they went through, I remember Lauren Smith, I never got to interview the other captain, which was Brad Shan, deceased, and unfortunately a hunting accident before I could meet him, but I did speak with his wife. But Lawrence remembered quite well that he wasn't fussy about having his boat in it, and actually had concerns about buoyancy. It was not normal tidal foam that sometimes occurs in the ebbing tide. That was their expressed opinion. And people who remember Brad Shan, especially, when he expressed that opinion to me, and I said it, there were people that said, oh, I heard it was this, and the Coast Guard said, when you said that Brad Shan remembered what the foam was like, and it wasn't normal tidal foam, everybody would nod and agree, yes, well, Brad would know. You know, he understood local conditions well. Had a well-equipped boat and a lifetime of experience here. The search at the time was called off at 3 a.m. and everybody, including people like Laurie, went back home. The search resumed at first light. And at first light the next morning, Coast Guard Cutter 101, Lifeboat 101 actually is what it is, came back from Clark's Harbour. And at this point, they had Laurie back on the boat. I've seen pictures of him. He looks quite good in the old National Enquirer. Shock of blonde hair, standing on the boat. Because, of course, you know, he was telling them the details, like where it first hit and, you know, the last known surface position and these kind of things. And things were happening fast because, of course, through the night, even when the physical search had ended and these men had gone home, things were starting to happen in Huron and Broad. Of course, communication between the Mounties and Halifax was all going through the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. And of course, by morning, what they realized is, you know, there aren't any missing aircraft. There aren't any late aircraft. And all the witnesses said at the time that this object was at least 60 feet in one dimension with the 4 flashing lights, which Laurie describes as 1, 2, 3, 4, and then all flashing together. Now, Laurie does believe that he saw some kind of American prototype test aircraft or something of the sort. I've added a few adjectives, but that was his feeling at the time. And remember, nobody did report a UFO. But, you know, if you're testing a military aircraft near a populated area like this, you don't put flashing lights on it. You don't attract attention. And no commercial traffic was missing. The other thing is, if a craft went down there, where is it? They did an extensive search. For the next 5 days, Navy divers, originally they sent 4 down into the area. They came on an old deuce-and-a-half Army truck. And these were divers from the Fleet Diving Unit. You know, on their caps it would have said HMCS Granby, which would have been their station in Halifax, which never ever left the port in Dartmouth. A day later, 3 more divers were sent down, flown in by helicopter to Shelburne. I have the actual military orders and telexes of who came, how they arrived, where they searched, to expand the search area. They reported to the press and in the military telexes that they were getting no results, and the search area was expanded. And eventually they were diving, doing grid searches that were a mile by a mile and a half in length. Now, conditions in the sound, visibility at the time was about 20 feet, which is better than usual. When I've been down in it, or when we did the search I directed in '95, visibility was only maybe 10 feet. But there's a lot of life in the water there that time of year. But anyway, they said they had 20 feet visibility, and there was just nothing, no results. By Sunday night, this happened, by the way, the sighting was Wednesday night, going into Thursday morning. The search continued until Sunday evening at last light, and around 9 p.m., with a directive order from Maritime Command, the search was canceled. And I bear in mind how much was involved here. Like I said, RCC called Ottawa. The UFO report went to Defense Headquarters in Ottawa, where the Air Desk, that's Canada's division at the time that handled UFOs, we had one then at the RCAF. It was colloquially called the Air Desk. And the Air Desk had a few other functions, but that was one of their primary things in 1967. What's interesting about that is, unlike Blue Book in the States, its counterpart, is it was more than a filing system. The Air Desk did actual investigations, and in fact, to put it in perspective, in 1967 they did 9, Shag Harbour being perhaps the most famous one. The other one there, it would have been the Stephen Michelak case in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, which by the way is Canada's largest single UFO file. But you know, they received, I think, 256 reports from police that year, and there were 9 on-site investigations where they thought the evidence warranted that kind of expenditure. It all came down to money in the end. Anyway, that Sunday night, which is what, the 8th of October, they canceled the underwater search. And they released a statement to the press, which appeared in the Chronicle Herald the next day and various other papers around the province, which said that the search had been canceled and they didn't find anything. They don't know what they were looking for. Guess it was one of those things. And like good Nova Scotians, most people went home, made a sandwich, and forgot about it. But I'll tell you something. The military did not forget about it. And they were very concerned about this because, like I say, a lot of checking was done, and they know there was no aircraft. Remember, I'm going to tell you something. Typically on a UFO case like this, if you're wondering, like we know 7 people called the RCMP right away. And I can tell you what the ratio is. Before the internet, in those days, typically 1 over 10 people reported. Most people didn't know how or simply didn't want to get mixed up in it or testify or whatever. So looking at that number, that would insist that there had to be at least 70 witnesses. I suspect there was more in this case than that. But certainly 7 felt compelled to call right away. Now, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation here today because there's no projector. I hope to have one tomorrow, but Don's going to be covering this topic. But there's a number of documents and things I have that show clearly their evidence. In fact, their proof that the military was hardly done with this case with the cancellation of the underwater search. And here's some of the key things I'll mention that prove that beyond any shadow of a doubt. First of all, they were going back and sort of touching base with the witnesses, as Laurie said, and this went on for some weeks. But they were also down by the Moss plant, and the Mounties could be seen checking the shoreline just in case something came ashore. But here's the other thing that's the real corker to my mind, that they weren't done. Yes, the underwater search was over. But 1 month later, just shy of it, November 2nd, every newspaper in Nova Scotia carries a little headline story, "Military wants UFOs reported." That's an unusual one in a newspaper. And under that banner, it's attributed to Major Vic Eldridge, who was the executive officer at CFS Barrington at Baccarat, where your relative worked for it. Interestingly enough, he went through basic training with my father at Cornwallis. And I thought it odd that a month later, so he was one of the initial military people I contacted, and I called him. This was a very interesting conversation. They don't all go this way, but this is a bad one. I contacted him and told Vic Eldridge, who I was, and I wanted to talk to him about the Shag Harbour incident. And he's like, "The what?" And I said, "Well, back in October, you were the XO." "Yes, yes." He says, "I remember, and your commanding officer was, and all this." And I said, he didn't remember anything about it, he said. I said, "Well, let me read from your appeal. You put a story. You wrote," at the time, he was also employed as a stringer for all the weekly papers on military matters. He said, "Well, he said there was lots of crazy things going on back then." And I said, "Well, there was no missing aircraft. You guys were still looking. Like, what did you think? Just, I want to know." And he said, "What are you trying to do with this?" I said, "Well, at this point, I don't know." And I honestly didn't know. I wasn't thinking, geez, I'll write a book, or I'm going to go on TV. That'd get to happen. I was just, look, I'll be honest, I was unemployed at the time, had time on my hands. I'm a curious fellow. I just wanted to know. Well, he said, "What is it you're trying to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I'd like to think there might be enough for a book." And he says, "Listen," he said, "I wouldn't do that." He says, "I'm sure there's nothing to this." I said, "So you don't remember it, but you're sure there's nothing to it?" He said, he says, "It just takes one call." He says, "For guys like you, there's not enough to wipe up with a J-cloth." I laughed at him and I said, something, that world, if it ever existed, is gone. I said, "I know you guys had to threaten. My dad went through training with you." I said, "But I'm telling you, thankfully, that world is gone." And he hung up the phone. But anyway, it was clear there was still an interest in the case. The other thing is I was starting to get access to information request response, both formally and informally, from Ottawa. And what was clear was not only were they still seeking information, not only were they trying to figure out this little mystery, but this case was changing UFO policy in Ottawa in a major way. In fact, it caused them to take away responsibility for UFO investigations from the military and give it to the National Research Council. And that was a big mistake in several ways. What they said was, look, this doesn't appear to be any kind of military threat. This requires, however, serious scientific investigation, but it never got it. When it first went there were 2 scientists at NRC that were willing to accept this. Professor Rupert McNeil, who worked out of Acadia as a geology professor, and Professor Tennyson at the University of Toronto. They took it most seriously. They were supposed to be able to call on field units as necessary from the Mounties and from that, but that never happened. And over the years, and as these men retired, the NRC effort just became a file effort like the US Blue Book, which had been canceled altogether as a result of the Condon Committee recommendations. So at that point, Shag Harbour and many other UFO cases of various merits, good and bad, slip into the dustbin of history. But then people like me come along 26 years later, who's a curious fellow, and think, you know what? There's something more to this than meets the eye. And I think that's quite clear. I was shocked in the beginning that all through that period this had languished for so long, till I began looking at it in the early 90s, because all the documents, the military telexes, what they were doing, had always been, unclassified at source. That's not to say, however, that there isn't a secret or black box element to this case, because there is, particularly to the connected cases. Look, I think people in Ottawa were smart enough back then to realize that Canada in 1967 was not New Mexico in 1947. Canadians, you just couldn't come out here on the CBC and say, well, another show here, go home people, it's tea. That wouldn't wash, right? You couldn't come out and say, well, you know what, it was really just a weather balloon with 4 flares tied together. 4 flares don't last that long in the water, they don't flash in sequence, they don't do all kinds of things. You would have to get a better explanation than that. Well, they just left it as a mystery, but the thing is, they knew that while everybody was looking at the impact site, that the real story was actually up at Shelburne, at least according to the divers. This is what they told me at first, and I'll tell you, it's interesting. You gotta remember, when you're in the military, and you follow orders, and the training back then was harsh at the height of the Cold War. I know my dad went through it, I've interviewed many of these men. When they went home, they left this behind them. They were constantly told and threatened, loose lips sink ships, right? When I found the divers, and I'd had their names on the telex orders, who was there, I knew they were there. They were easy for me to track down. My best friend in high school, his dad trained them all, Guy Fenn. He was retired in Halifax, he sent me to them. And they all said early on, well, the real story was up off Shelburne. We knew everybody was looking there. We figured, hell, let them look. It ain't there no more. That had gone up the coast near off Government Point, and that was never in the newspaper at the time. One of the other interesting things they told me, now remember these guys, like I said, they didn't take notes, they didn't take it home, they didn't tell their wives. It was just another mission, right? What they did say was that those ships sailed for a week off Shelburne, and exactly a week later, this thing moved out to the coast and floated away. And then I find the Cameron sighting in the newspaper a week later, which is 1 week to the hour. Exactly what the divers had told me. They didn't know I was going to come to their door. They couldn't even remember the year. But I know for a fact those men were there. And there's ways you can check on them back then in the age before the internet that are kind of interesting. For example, one of the divers I met, and I had to go to Ottawa to find him in the Pean. He was listed, he said, I was the underwater naval photographer. And he says, you'll never find it, but up off Shelburne, I shot 400 feet of what we've seen under the water. Well, I could check that because there's a little thing we had in Halifax Library called Mite City Directory. And I don't know if you know what that is, but larger communities across Canada and the US years ago, every year a book would come out like the phone book. But it was a very useful thing because it had all the streets listed by number, had your jobs listed, what you did and everything. So I looked up this man who told me what his job was, and it had RCN diver, and afterwards in brackets it said underwater naval photographer. So at least I could verify their position. So at first, believe it or not, you think this would make me happy and jump up and down and say, "You lucky thing, you're just tripping over evidence everywhere." And when I seen how tough it was when you watch the documentaries on TV for guys like Stanton Friedman or other people, I thought, yeah. But you know what? It actually cheesed me right off because I thought, I don't want to have all these problems of like 2 impact sites and testimony that I can't prove or back up on paper. And at first I ignored the Shelburne story. But it kept coming back to haunt me, and I found it over time, it had legs. One of the other things was, the same night as Shag Harbour, there was sightings, UFO sightings all over the province. And some of them do make the local papers near where they happened, but they were all eclipsed by what happened here, because here something came down and hit the water, and the military showed up and searched. So it just eclipsed interest in the plethora of other sightings over the province that night. In fact, amongst researchers, even in the States, once I started bringing attention to this, it quickly gained the title of Night of the UFOs, because there were sightings everywhere, and there, many of them are quite credible. Let me tell you about one that has some bearing on the Shelburne story as to whether that's a crock or not, or whether there's anything to it. One of the sightings that happened that night was 16 miles off the coast, off Sambro. There was a dragger out there, the Nicholson. And at the time, it was a brand new vessel, well equipped with what was in its day state-of-the-art Decker radar. And the captain radios the RCMP in Lunenburg and says, I just wanted to let you know that there's like 4 UFOs on the water out here. And he could see them on radar and see these bright red lights in the distance. And he watches them for over 2 hours, and at one point, one of them becomes airborne and starts arcing in the direction here towards southwestern Nova Scotia. This is about, 2 hours before the Shag Harbour incident here. The Mounties are quite interested in what he's got to say, and they say when you come back to report after you're done fishing, like, please come in and file a report, which the captain did. Now, the captain was watching this on radar and looking. There was also 17 other men who bore witness to what they seen that night. And when Leo Howard Mersey got back to shore, he filled an RCMP report. And that RCMP report has become an X-file. It's now been leaked to other things. And let me tell you just what that means. At the time, an X-file, you know, it was funny. The show had just come out, you know, with Agent Mulder and Scully. And I wasn't sure what it meant. But the archivist that helped me find the document in St. Mary's, he looked at the coding number and found, he goes, oh, you got an X-file. I said, what the hell's an X-file? He said, that's a true confidential report. And what it means within the Canadian system is this, that back before the Access to Information Act, you had 6 levels of security. You got top secret, secret, restricted, all these were confidential. But the most important thing, designation, was the X-file. And when you put that on, I think they foresaw the coming of a system like the Access system. And the thing is, when it becomes an X-file, not only is it secret, but they don't admit it exists. If it doesn't exist, then you can't have it reviewed and have its security clearance downgraded. It's like, hey, we don't know what you're talking about. The interesting thing is, though, the reason this file surfaced was, it was in the papers of the late astronomer and Jesuit priest, Father Michael Burke Gaffney, who started the astronomy program in St. Mary's. He was also a UFO investigator for the government through, get it, the National Research Council. And he investigated many cases. As an astronomer, he claimed he had no interest in the topic and was famous for students when they bring it up. He'd go, oh, look, we're not going to talk about UFOs and just forget about them. But there are many correspondence pieces I have, and by the way, they are also X-Files, that of him calling the RCMP detachment, H Division in Halifax, and demanding to get these reports more timely and to be taken to the sites and this kind of thing. So, you know, he took it quite seriously. Of course, he was being paid for this too. I mean, he wore many hats. He was a real estate salesman, Jesuit priest, professor, busy guy. But here's the thing, back to that X-file, the first one I found. And the guy says, oh, this is an X-file. He explains the status of that. The next question was, why was this an X-file? Why was Shag Harbour not? But here's the thing. Remember I said nobody knew about what the divers were telling me, the Shelburne searches? I didn't hear it from Laurie or Dave Kendricks or anything about a second search up there. But these divers were saying, oh, you know, the real action was up at Shelburne. Nobody knew about that. When I read this RCMP report about the sightings of the Nickerson offshore, in the last couple sentences, the captain says, I've seen lots of naval activity out there past the mouth of Halifax Harbour at night under these conditions, and I've never seen anything that looked like this. But perhaps it's like the thing they're looking for down off Shag Harbour or off Shelburne. A second simultaneous search that the public didn't know about, and I thought, well, how did he know? Because he sailed by it, and he was warned by the harbour pilot not to go near it. There was naval operations in the area. Now, I can take this one step further, so you can sit there and draw that. By the way, the guy who was coordinating this search for the military from Ottawa, from the perspective of CFHQ, Canadian Forces Headquarters, was Squadron Leader William Bain, whose name was mentioned in the coverage at the time of the Chronicle Herald. Bain told me he didn't know about anything at Shelburne. He suspected the Americans hid it. Now, I don't have any paperwork on that, but I can tell you one thing. If you go to the weekly paper in Shelburne the week after, the Saturday afterwards, guess what you'll find? An American barge is brought into Shelburne Harbour for emergency repairs out by Government Point. It's 200 and something feet long, it has tarps all over it, and it's carrying what they call nuclear engines, which nobody should go near it. It names the company and who the tug and who contracted it. And it says it's on its way up the St. Lawrence to drop these nuclear engines near a new nuclear reactor being built at Sodus, New York. What's interesting is, you know, this thing is having problems and is leaking. They come in, or divers seem to repair this thing in like 10 hours and it's gone. Boy,
Anybody I talk to about the possibility of pulling that one off, you know. How many times do huge American barges get towed into Shelburne Harbour, especially when there's like mysterious objects crashing nearby? I don't know. That's a big coincidence. When I combine that with the fact of, you know, the Nickerson being warned away from the mouth of Shelburne Harbour, well, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, you know. But I mean, that's a matter of record of the local newspaper. You can sit there and say, well, I guess that's what it was, and it could be that. But I'm sorry, you know, how many days does something mysterious crash in Shag Harbour, and on the same weekend an American barge 200 feet long is pulled in, and you can't go near it because it says it has nuclear furnaces on it. And they cover it over. That's in the Shelburne Weekly paper. They got pictures of it. It's big. It's got a big crane with it too on a separate barge. So, you know, they were all geared up if need be. So between that Mountie X-File about what was seen off Sandville that night and why it was secret where Shag Harbour wasn't, of course, you know, you think about it, it's quite bright. Remember what I said. This wasn't New Mexico in 47. You couldn't tell everyone here, you couldn't shut down Highway 3, you couldn't do it. But somebody in Ottawa for change was half clever, unlike today. They said, you know what, this can work. This can work. And they worked it. And that's what it is. Everybody was looking here. The real action was up there. Now, that's what the divers told me. That's what some of the Mounties had told me. And like I say, if I had my projector, I could show you the actual X-File documents from Mountie, and, you know, these are on file in Ottawa. And if not, read the Shelburne paper from that came out every Thursday the next week about what came in and left the harbour that Saturday while the divers were down here. By the way, that same Shelburne paper that covers that never mentions what happens here. Every paper in Nova Scotia does, but not the Shelburne paper. But hey, we get nuclear furnaces out by Government Point, don't go near them. It's kind of suspicious. Anyway, that takes us up to the point where, like I say, you know, what happened when they stopped searching in the area and what happened when I started digging into it 26 years later. What's interesting is that it changed policies on UFOs in this country, but somehow it has slipped into the dustbin of history. When I first told Stanton Freeman and others in the beginning in 1993 when I started digging into this, nobody knew what I was talking about. They were like, no, never heard of that. And these guys were supposedly experts on that. These few years later, this case is referred to as Canada's most important UFO case. The trouble is, not too many Canadians are interested in UFOs. You know, nobody's beating down the door here today or whatever, they just aren't. It's interesting, you know, I'll go down and do a talk somewhere in Toronto, you might get 200 people. Vancouver, you might get 500. I go to some place in the backwoods of Alabama, you get 5,000 in an old arena. It's that kind of difference. But, you know, just because everybody is interested doesn't mean it isn't important. I believe that UFOs are real, whatever they are. I don't know what they are. I can't tell you what they are or where they're from. I'm not going to claim to, but I can tell you what they're not. You know, and the thing is, you know, it's just a great mystery that hasn't been answered. And let me show you, I do have a couple papers here that are interesting. You know, I always bark, you know, one of the sound bites, and you come up with sound bites, you have to, because when people stick microphones in your face and you got 5 minutes and they say, you got 5 minutes to tell the story. You got to boil it down, right? But what's interesting, and I like how Laurie picked up, he says, that's what you wanted me to say. Well, that's what the Mountie said, but I just want their words to be heard. Because one of the things I like about this case is the fact that it's not people like Laurie and Dave Kendricks and Norman Smith that made the claim. This is one where the authorities stuck their neck out and said, well, geez, I don't know what it was, where it was from, or what the hell it was doing. But it wasn't from this neck of the woods. But I have a print here. And this is from the National Archives website. And again, these are not my words. You can download the page, will look like that on your computer exactly. And I love how when they pick the strong words, sometimes stronger than I would choose, so I don't mind quoting them. Here's their take on it. On the night of October 4th, 1967, officers of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and 6 civilians, it's actually 7, witnessed, it was probably 70, but 7 reported, Laurie being one of them, witnessed an incredible yet unexplainable sight. Earlier in the evening, the RCMP had received many phone calls from residents reporting that an airplane had crashed into Shag Harbour. Both the RCMP and locals rushed to the shore of the harbour, but what they encountered there was far from a conventional aircraft. Their words again, not mine. Witnesses reported seeing an object that went in the air was at least 60 feet in length, moving in an easterly direction before it descended rapidly to the water and made a bright splash on impact. A single white light appeared on the surface for a short period of time afterwards. RCMP, with help from local fishermen and their boats, endeavored to reach the object before it disappeared. Local fishermen remember traveling through thick, glittery yellow foam to get to where they saw the object. Bubbles from beneath the surface of the water appeared around the boats. The crews attempted to search for evidence, but none was found. The Department of National Defense conducted an underwater search of the area, but failed to locate any evidence of the object. The crashing of the UFO into Shag Harbour is still discussed today, with many articles appearing on the internet. There was no trace of the RCMP reports of this sighting. That's because no one reported the UFO. In the files, the Department of National Defense has identified this sighting as unsolved and still a mystery, and the only documentation that exists is in the file is in the form of D&D memos. Again, unconventional, that's their own words today, like on the website. If you look at the documents of the time, and there's an interesting one signed by Bain that went to the Minister of Defense, Lester Pearson at the time, to everybody, and they all initialed and signed off on it. In the third paragraph of that, it lists, it says, in fact, it has been determined that this is not a missing aircraft, flare float, and in fact is no known object at this point in time. This is 36 hours after the incident. All these years later, this is in 2012, it still officially remains unsolved. So when I give these nice sound bites that TV likes to get, like, the Shag Harbour incident is the world's only UFO crash scenario that is supported in that interpretation by government documents that are freely available without controversy as to their origin or their authenticity. It's not a stretch. On my computer, and tomorrow Don might be showing some of them, I have all the military orders that went between the bases, what to say. And by the way, when I talk about, you know, the official, when they closed the underwater search, they hadn't stopped looking, they'd simply closed the underwater search. They weren't finding any debris here. Cameras, people went home, like I say, made a sandwich, forgot about it. Went to the back pages of the press. There were speculative stories about what it might have been, but nobody knew what it was. But what's interesting is one of those telexes near the end says, look, from now on, if you got anything to report, just call us. Don't write it down. I have that order, you know, tell them not to. Well, if there was nothing to find, nothing to report, why not write it down? Again, it was like Vic Eldridge in Yarmouth, who later he was a town councillor after he got out of the military. I got a kick, like, he didn't remember it, but he was able to assure me there was nothing to it. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. I call that tap dancing when they start doing that stuff, you know. I'll tell you though, when I was in Ottawa, it was interesting. I picked up Squadron Leader William Bain, and I'll tell you how much bull goes around here. The reporter that wrote the headline story in the Herald, he got in a great deal of trouble for that. But Monday morning when he come in, it was like it was coverage in the paper, but by Saturday it was a headline. And Monday morning the Herald was getting all kinds. And as you all know, the Chronicle Herald is one of Canada's most conservative broadsheets. Well, Monday morning, first thing, when the reporter comes in, Ray McLeod, nice guy, he's a retired teacher now in Dartmouth, and the managing night editor that cleared the headline, Harold Shea, was brought into the office. And it was like a scene from Ed Asner, you know, in the old days. He's pacing back and forth, smoking a cigar, and he says, you guys, sit there, don't move. And he takes the headline story and he bangs on the desk and says, you know what you're doing? You're effing scaring people. We're not in the business to scare people. He points at the managing editor and says, you should have known better. You're coming up to the day shift. And he says, you're off the story to the reporter. And they turned it over to Dave, the guy who started Frank Magazine, because he was experienced and British trained. In other words, he did what he was told. As Don likes to say it, he's one of those guys that did what his mom told him. Well, you know, that's what you're up against, right? And I see this all the time. And look, you know, it hasn't changed, whether it's years ago or now. You may remember a couple of years ago, the pilots came up to watch this happen from the air that were flying over on a Pan Am flight. They decided it was in their best interest not to file an official report. Yesterday, just in Halifax, I was reading the latest copy of The Warrior. And for people who don't know, The Warrior is that military magazine that pilots and that have at Shearwater. And this one especially is geared towards Sea King pilots. And in this, we have a story about a UFO sighting at Shearwater. I live just up the road from that nowadays in Eastern Passage. And this is him talking in an article about himself, his career, and you're reading all about, you know, falling out of a Sea King and taking pictures of girls at the beach in a Sea King and all of them falling asleep at the controls in a Sea King. It kind of worries you, doesn't it? And then he says, reflecting back, he said, in July of 1963, after the completion of a night flying at Shearwater, and everything on the base was secure for night, my assistant, B. Stan John Cavanaugh, as he was known, and I were watching a late movie on TV, located in the control room by the radar. I don't know if that's part of their duties, but glancing out of the control position to the south toward Heartland Point at approximately 2 a.m., I observed a strange light in the air over Eastern Passage, just offshore. I advised John that what I was observing and expressed it was very weird. He showed interest and concurred with me. It was a cigar-shaped object at the time. Its height was about 1,000 to 2,000 feet above ground level. Its length was approximately 150 feet, and the middle portion about 50 feet through the girth. It was a pale blue color, which changed in an undulating movement to pale green and pink, and then to red. While this was going on, I asked the ground control unit if they had anything on radar, and they could not see any contacts, but came up to the tower and observed what was visible to the south. This continued for about 10 minutes, and then it commenced to move slowly to the southwest out over McNabb's Island. It then reversed direction and headed east along the shoreline, and was just off runway 16 near the Sea Kings, when it started to climb and rapidly disappeared vertically out of sight at high speed. The normal procedure would have been and should have been to call Moncton Air Traffic Control and report what was observed. Our decision at the time was to not open that can of worms. We went back to watching the movie. So there's our tax dollars at work when it comes to UFOs, right? They just don't want it to be affiliated with their career. And to be honest, it's a credit to the RCMP officers here that they've never changed their story or testimony. Ron Pond went on an episode of Sightings with me down at Hollywood in 1996 and basically told his details. It's interesting to note, too, that their observations did not inhibit their career or advancement afterwards. And, you know, the force is very hard to get a promotion in. Well, I'm not sure what to jump to next in the thing here. We can, like I say, there's been many great finds since. Like, you know, I had the pilots come a few years ago. It's interesting. You know, the glory days of boxes and boxes of telexes and military documents coming to my door is over. However, it's interesting that, you know, like I say, in the last couple of years, we found new witnesses in terms of pilots flying over, you know, like the, you know, marked down and saved the charts on that night. They sit in my file cabinet at home now. You know, Pan Am Flight 160, which had 2 flight crews in the cockpit, because one was dead heading back on a flight to England. Came out and watched the whole thing here. It's interesting, too, because, you know, all these years later, when I was interviewing the men, the flight engineer especially, you could hear the emotion in his voice. He was scared. He was the junior officer that night. And this UFO, which looked very much like what was seen here, was in front of them at 39,000 feet, and they were aiming on it. And at one point, it's estimated to be just half a mile in front of the cockpit. Well, when you're flying at 500 knots, that's way too close. And he's after the pilot, and the pilot, hey, Kurt, he goes, we got to come out of autopilot, man. We got to descend. Like if something happens, if something breaks off this thing, we're done. And as the 2 men after this thing follow, and by the way, there was much communication with Boston on this. They were coming in over the Gulf of Maine, about to approach what they call the Davies intersection. At that point, you're handed over to Moncton Air Traffic Control. And they're not sure what to do because they're reporting a UFO in front of them, threatening to Logan. And Logan's sitting there saying, well, we're not painting anything. We see a SAC mission 20 miles behind you and 20,000 feet lower, but we don't see anything. And they're getting a little panicky. And just as they're about to come out of autopilot, this thing starts to put distance between them after pacing them for 5 minutes and crowding them. and up it goes at an angle very much like this report here, and they lose sight of it. Their decision too, as these guys, they didn't watch the movie, was no. And it's just like that scene, you know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Do you want to file a UFO report? No. And he asks them a second time, they go, no, we don't want to do that. You know, it can be a black mark on a pilot's career for sure. This is the unfortunate aspect of UFO reality. There's still the stigma attached to witnessing this phenomenon in this time. You know, for many of us here that are younger, especially when you grow up in the age of Steven Spielberg, and, you know, there's more of an enlightened approach to the possibilities. But, you know, to these men at the time, you know, this was a big barrier and a dead end to your career if you weren't careful. Loose lips, if they didn't sink ships, could certainly sink your career and chance for advancement. That's the unfortunate truth. I often say there's nothing in it for the witnesses, let alone money or payment or fame or anything like that. And look, that applies even for the high strangeness cases. I mean, I knew Betty Hill well before she passed away. And you know, if you started suggesting to her that it was some kind of a career move, she'd just roll her eyes, you know, and of course, such wasn't the case. You know, when you look out today and you see the weather today, it's hard to imagine that clear night and what it's like. I once wrote a song, it had nothing to do with UFOs, but there's a line in it I like that says, you know, it's hard to be crazy in the cold, harsh light of day. It's hard to believe and reflect back. And you know, you can look at all the evidence, you can look at all the papers, you can look at somebody's credentials or all the alphabet soup after the name, or people who, you know, can tell a good story. But the thing is, in the end, there's nothing like what Laurie experienced. Seeing is believing. And one of the things I consider a marker of a genuine UFO case is that, you know, when you see something you can't explain, you know it intuitively. And the thing is, it can be transformational to your life. And when you see something like that you can't explain, you know, you may never get answers. You'll seek them. You'll crave them even. You probably won't get the answers you like. But you know what you know is that something fundamental inside has changed. Lawrence Smith, who had a UFO experience here in this community 3 years after the Shag Harbour crash, put it to me this way. He said, Chris, there was my life before that night, and there's been my life since. He said, the minute that happened, I didn't know what it was, what it meant, forget about point of origin or what's really going on. But like he said, I knew one thing, everything I've been taught to that point was wrong. And some people see it that way. And sometimes you'll see two people witness something together and it'll hit them entirely different. Some will see it positive, some will see it negative.